Good afternoon, everybody. Matt Hoyt here from MRC, and welcome to our webcast of Discovering the Value of Solve Blocks and Symbolics. So today, I'll be hosting along with Tim Bond from PTC. All right, so a little on MRC. MRC is been with PTC, selling PTC products for a little over 10 years now. We started off as just handling support renewals, and we're actually now the premier Mathcad reseller nationwide. We can sell any version of Mathcad across North America. We can handle upgrades, renewals for any support renewals or expired licenses, and we also sell PTC's other major products such as CAD, ArborText, and Windchill Quality. Great. So I know a lot of you, have worked with us in the past, and if any of you do have questions or need assistance with your Mathcad, we also are very intimate with tech support, so please reach out to us. We'd be happy to help. So I've been with MRC now for about 5 years. My background is in mechanical engineering. It's where I first learned Mathcad, actually through high school, through a technical high school doing drafting, and then up through college. So I handle mostly sales for Mathcad, along with an existing customer base and renewals, along with the Creo and other product lines. Tim has been with PTC now for about 2 years. Very knowledgeable in Mathcad. He's helped us with several webcasts in the past. And he's actually one of our go-to guys where if you come to us with questions, we often reach out to Tim to get you guys a better answer. His background is in mechanical engineering from UMass Amherst. All right, so again, throughout this program, throughout the webcast, if you have any questions, please let us know, and we'll be following up with you after. All right, Tim, are you ready to go?
I am. How you doing, Matt?
Doing well, sir. And yourself?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. As Matt said, I'm an application engineer with PTC, and I'm going to walk you guys through today 2 of the premium features in Mathcad Prime, which are Solve Blocks and Symbolics. Thanks to those of you that voted from the last webcast on what you'd be interested. Solve Blocks and Symbolics, I think we had a tie, so we're gonna run through both. For those of you not too familiar with, I'm gonna start with Solve Blocks and then move to Symbolics, but for those of you not too familiar with Solve Blocks in the software can be found on the Math tab right here. Or you can use the keyboard shortcut Control-1, and a solve block is going to be able to do a few things for you. It obviously, by its name, is going to solve things for you. So if you have a system of equations, the solve block will be able to, for example, tell you the intersection point. So let's insert a solve block, and let's do a quick example. And let's say, before we go to the solve block, that we have 2 functions, and we're going to find the intersection point of 2 lines. That'll be probably the most basic thing a solve block will do for us. So if we have 2 equations, f of x is 6x plus 3, and g of x is 2x minus 7, right? We want to find the coordinates in which 2 equations or curves collide with each other. You'll notice on the side here, there's 3 distinct sections of a solve block, and there's guesses, constraints, and solvers. So I actually like to start with the constraint, and in this case, if you want, again, this is one of the things the solve block will do, but if you're looking to solve the system of equations, your constraint is that f of x will be equal to g of x, right? And you'll notice that I did not use a colon equal sign, what we would consider our definition. I actually used a bold equal sign here, which is a Boolean operator, and it would be right here. So Booleans are greater than, less than, greater than or equal to. They're true false statements. So we want f of x to be equal to g of x. And now the guess value, the algorithm that's going to run behind here, is going to need a guess value. So that's what we're going to guess. We're going to guess the answer is 1. And then we're going to call one of the functions, we're going to call find. So we'll bring find in. It's going to give you 3 placeholders by default. We only need the first one, so we're going to go ahead and find x. And we can press equals and get an answer. And rather than just evaluating it like everything in Mathcad, we can evaluate the answer to a variable, and then we could use that variable anywhere downstream in further on calculations. So, and again, like everything with Mathcad, this is all dynamic. So if the equation changes, everything will change and update. If we change this equation also, right, everything's live updating, you know, change it to a negative, whatever. And this is good and all. A very simple example, we can solve for the intersection point and assign it to a variable. But sometimes a variable isn't quite enough and is not quite robust enough to carry forward really what we want to do. And we can actually, I'm going to copy and paste everything and just do kind of a parallel calculation. But what I'm going to do quickly is just rename the functions and variables with capital letters, just so we can distinguish between the left side and the right side. So with no changes, we still have a variable. Well, let's say our function here, f, was, rather than this 6 being a constant, what if I actually made this a variable? Now, of course, this is going to error out because now f of x doesn't even actually exist. But I could define a as a constant. So in this case over here, a is 6. And if I find a is 6, then actually, and then actually made an argument to f, it would find the same result, right? But that's the same as this because integer or intersection point here is still a variable. What I'm going to do instead of defining a as 6, I'm actually going to, 1, I'm going to get rid of the evaluation, and 2, I'm going to do what we call parameterizing the solve block, which is rather than just defining it as a variable, I'm going to define this solve block as a function of the constant. Now I can't evaluate the variable anymore because it no longer exists, but I can evaluate, well, what is my integer at a? And I'm going to press equals even though I'll get an error, and I'm going to define a as that same, I'll do 6 again. So now we know 6. And down here on both sides, I could do f of int, I could do g of int here to see my answer is the same. And I can do the same thing over here. So now I have f. My x value that I'm plugging in is this function. So I'm actually going to define this as x. And I'll do it as capital X. So I can define f of capital X comma a is equal to 4.5. Then I can do g of capital X is equal. And now it's a function. So I could call this with a scalar, right? And everything will update. And this then goes and calls the solve block as a function rather than calling it as a variable. So 2 ways, the right side of this page being a bit more robust, but 2 ways to solve using the find function at the end of the solve block. Okay? We have a couple. Sure, Matt, what's up?
If you don't mind me jumping in, so this is great. I know a lot of people define as a key function. What are some other functions we can use in the solve blocks?
Yeah. So again, find is the simple example, right? You're just finding whether it's the intersection point of 2 curves. You're finding the point at which a certain function is equal to 0, or maybe reaches a steady state point of 1 or 10 or whatever it may be. But there are a handful of other functions that we can call in a solve block. I don't have time to go through all of them, but I am going to highlight a couple. And most of them are going to be found here in this solving dropdown. So find has another equivalent called min error. And min error is essentially find, but there are going to be some rare cases where the find function is unable to converge on a solution, right? It's iterating down, and if you come to your calculation tab, get that out of the way. If you come to your calculation tab, you have a tolerance and a convergence tolerance. So if these are too tight, or for whatever reason find is unable to converge, that function min error will do the same exact thing as find, except it will give to you the last value, in this case for x here, before the find function failed to converge. So it'll go back one iteration and give you that. Now, doing a different type of thing, you can see we have maximize and minimize here, and these are for optimization functions. A good example of this will be here on the spring, where if I go down to focus on just the solve block for a moment, you can see I'm calling the minimize function at the end of the solve block. Now, what is this worksheet doing? Well, this is a helical compression spring design, and rather than just having one guess value like I did over here, I have three guess values for the diameter of the wire, the diameter of the coil of the spring, and then the number of coils that this spring is going to have. It's based on some constants up here that, again, could change, but those are my variables that are constant in this case. And then there are a set of constraints. You'll notice other Boolean operators here, like the greater than or equal to, the diameter of the wire must be between two values. Deflection must be greater than this. So you can see the other Boolean operators being used here. And then when I come down here to the bottom to minimize, the first thing I call is W. Well, what is W? W is the weight of this spring. I want to minimize the weight, but I want to satisfy all of these constraints. And the weight we define, or your goal function, I would call it, we actually define using the normal colon equal sign. And so now Mathcad will go through and iterate on your three guess values to come to the three inputs that give you the minimal weight while passing all of these requirements. And what you can do is then you can just evaluate those out. Now you could twist this around to make this a function of, let's say you wanted to get rid of applied load and have it actually be a function of the solve block rather than the variable. You could flip the solve block around to do that. So that's minimize. Maximize would be really, it's very similar to minimize. Obviously, it's just finding the maximum point. So I don't have an example up for that. But the third thing really that you can do, so you can find, what I would call optimize with maximize, minimize. The third thing you can do is ODE solve. Now, ODE solve, let me come back. I'm going to create I'm just going to come down a little. I'll just actually create a new page. Let's see. So, ODE solve, let's say I had a system of equations. M is 2, K is 2. I'm going to do like if we had like a spring damper system. B is 1. So we have our mass, our spring constant, our damping coefficient, we'll give our max force, we'll just normalize it to 1. Do lambda is equal to K times M. I'll define a force function that's going to be applied to the spring damper system. I'll just do, excuse me, F max cosine of lambda T. And now what you will need is a ordinary differential equation, right? So to do that, we're going to insert a solve block. So we have our input variables. We have our force function. Now let's insert a solve block. And I'm going to type in a differential equation. So sum of the forces is equal to ma, right? So if we had mass times x double prime of t plus, now we're going to do the damper, x b times x prime of t plus k times x of t, and that'll be equals a Boolean equals to our force, right? Sum of the forces is equal to ma. And now, rather than guess values, when we're doing differential equations, you think about boundary conditions and initial conditions. So I'm actually going to define the velocity at time 0 to be equal to 0, and the position at time 0 to be equal to 0. And then I call our ordinary differential equation solve function, and I say I want to solve for the position, x of t, and I want to do it for 20 seconds. I want to find the response of my system for 20 seconds. So we give our differential equation. We could have a series of differential equations. I'll show you an example of that next. But at a basic level, just how do we set up a differential equations problem? We have any variables. We have our differential equation. Now, one important note here on the differential equation as I think about it, these apostrophes are entered with the keyboard command control plus apostrophe to enter the prime notation for ODEs. So if I do just a regular apostrophe there, it's going to give me an error, and it'll actually tell you to use the control dash. But just so you're aware, when you enter it, there's no visual difference, but we need to distinguish between x apostrophe, a variable name, and x apostrophe meaning the derivative. So we do control apostrophe. And now we can call this. So if I insert a plot, we can actually view the response of this. So I'll just graph f of x of t versus t, and we can see the system response. Now by default, it'll go -10 to 10. I'm just going to make this 0 and 2, and we'll have it go all the way out to 20. I'll leave it at 10, it's fine. So we can see the response of this differential equation system. And now, if you change, the spring constant, you can see that you can see how the system changes in response to that. Oh, too far. Now, a bit more complex example of that would be if you added a second mass with springs and dampers on both sides. And I didn't do mine with units, but the solve block, actually neither of the examples I've done so far I've implemented units in, but units can be carried forward throughout all solve block functionality. So here, rather than just one differential equation, we have two. We have 4 initial conditions for the position and initial velocities of block 1 and block 2. And then we solve for the position functions of 1 and 2, and we graph those. And you can see, if I were to change this and then come down here and click out, we can see the whole system of ordinary differential equations update itself. All right, so again, find, minimize, or maximize for if you guys are doing optimization problems. You guys definitely have design goals, but you also have constraints at the same time. So doing things like this, putting in mathematical constraints with Boolean operators will allow you to find your minimum operating parameters within that performance envelope. And if you're doing some slightly more advanced mathematics with the ordinary differential equations and moving parts and inverse kinematics with robots or anything like that, then your ordinary differential equations will definitely come in handy on the numeric solving side.
Great. So that kind of wraps up part 1 then, huh? So moving forward, we've done a lot now numerically using solve blocks. Can we look at solving things symbolically some more? And maybe even the use of
Yeah.
solve blocks with that as well?
Yeah. So the symbolics piece is pretty interesting, and I always find it's kind of the most unknown functionality in Mathcad, but it can be pretty powerful. Symbolically, if I just open up the symbolic drop-down menu up from the Math tab, we can see all of the keywords and modifiers that we can use to tell Mathcad's engine how you want to present the symbolic representation. So like a very simple example would be the classic ax squared plus bx plus c. And what I can do is I could ask Mathcad to solve for x, and it'll give me something that looks darn close to the quadratic formula, and I could even have it go a step further by telling it to simplify it. So we can see the b plus or minus, right, the square root b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So solve is a keyword that we can bring in to tell Mathcad to solve this equation. Now I didn't put it here, but if you don't put an equal sign, it's an assumed equals 0. This is optional here, optional assumed equals 0. If you obviously had something on the right-hand side of your equation that you were setting equal to that wasn't 0, you're going to need to type it in, but if it's equal to 0, it's optional. We can also do things like factor. So if you had a function and you wanted to factor out the like terms, x minus 4 and then x plus 3, something like that. A lot of algebra and trigonometry help for you here. And then we can also do things that you just can't do numerically, like inverse Laplace transforms. Laplace transforms are a symbolic calculation only. So for those, and I'll pull one up here in a second, but we're going to have to do that symbolically. Let's go through. So kind of like over here, we solved a very simple system of equations. Let's do the same or a similar thing symbolically. So let's say we had two equations. Let's say we had x minus pi times y is equal to a as one equation. And then we had 2x plus the sine of theta times y is equal to b. Let's say we had these two equations. We have two unknowns. We have x and y. Let me define a couple values here. So we'll say theta is 30 degrees. We'll say a is, 6 and b is 0. Okay. Now, we could use a solve block to find what x and y are equal to in this case. But let's do it symbolically. Let's say, we have some numbers, but let's actually pretend we didn't have any. And let's clear a, b, and theta from the symbolics engine. So there's a function called clear, which if you had a variable, if I have b is equal to 1, and I say clear b, and I try to evaluate b, it won't let me. It doesn't know what it is. If I said, but down here, I can still numerically evaluate b because I've only cleared it from the symbolics engine. So let's set up I'm going to insert a matrix, just a little 2x1, and I'm just going to put each of my equations into one of the placeholders, into each of the placeholders, right? And now again, I'm going to call this solve function. So Mathcad's symbolics, we've seen the solve up here. Let's do it again. And rather than solving for one variable, I'm going to solve for x, and I'm going to solve for y. And I'm going to let Mathcad chew on that. And it's going to bring back to me, there's my answer for x, and there's my answer for y. And what we can do symbolically is we can actually retroactively go back and assign that to variables. So I'm going to assign that to x and y. And I can say, well, x, I just want to symbolically evaluate it. What is x? And I could do the same thing for y. So we can see the symbolic representation of both x and y. And then because I've defined some numbers up here, I could also ask for it numerically. So x and then y. So if you have a system of equations, we can enter them into a matrix. We can solve for x, y, or if you had z here, if I had a third equation that brought z into the equation set, it would solve for z as well, assuming there was a solution. And then we can symbolically evaluate what x is and y is, and then symbolics and numerics work hand in hand, so we can see the numeric answer of that. Now, let's do the same, just like last time over here. Today, and actually I'm going to paste in an image so you get an idea of what we're dealing with here. So just something simple like that. But let's do the same problem. Let's do it symbolically. All right. So I'm actually going to we'll do the same numbers. We'll do the same force. I'll grab the image and let's copy those and come down here. No, actually I already have the image. Let's move down. And we'll paste those. I don't need that twice. And let's come back and get the equation. So here's my equation for this. All right. Now, let's solve this symbolically. So this, we're in the time domain. We're going to want to use some inverse Laplace, right? Some Laplace transforms, and then some to get them into the S domain, and then we're going to do inverse Laplace to get back from the S to the T. Now this is a little intense, I realize. You could probably testing your memory, but let's go through it nonetheless. So let's turn the force into the S domain, and to do that, I'm going to take the Laplace of that. So let's come in here and find Laplace. Where is it? Laplace right here. And I want to take the Laplace, and my variable is t. And now f of s, we've converted this function into the S domain, right? Now let's do the same thing for our differential equation. Now the differential equation, I'm going to put it into a bit different of structure, but it's going to follow the same thing. So it's going to be it's going to be mass times s squared times x plus b times s times x, I'll use capital X's, plus k times x, and that's going to be equal to the force. So, and that force is actually f of s, and I'm going to say, there's just a symbolic representation of that, and I'm going to say solve for x. Okay, so there is step one. We've solved for x. And now we can actually say, we can add lines to this. So the symbolics, just like Mathcad's math reads left to right, top to bottom, so does whatever is above the symbolic evaluation line. So I can add something here, another keyword. I'm going to add expand. I don't want it displayed like this. This is kind of in factored form. I actually want to expand the bottom of that out. So I'm going to say expand s, and there we go. Now we have a fully drawn out polynomial in the denominator. And then the final thing I'm going to do is I want to get back to the time domain now that I've solved it for x. So I'm going to say, rather than Laplace, I'm going to say inverse Laplace, and I'm going to do it in terms of s. And now, I ran off the page slightly here, but there, that ugly mess that I would have hated to do by hand, I can now simply just call it a function x. And now if I insert a plot, I can graph x of t, and I can graph t. And there we go. There's that same system. I want to get rid of the negative values. I'll do it. I'll plot it against the same domain as I did last time. So there is that same answer. We did it using ODE solve numerically, and we can also do the same thing symbolically with using the Laplace transform method. So either one, okay, solving a system of equations just like we did up top, right? We can solve differential equations using Laplace techniques, and there are other things in here that you've probably seen: Fourier transforms, factoring, floating point. If you want Mathcad to actually return a numerical result, so I can go up to the top here. Well, let's say we actually, just in this simple example here, Mathcad, if you have variables defined that aren't cleared from the symbolic memory, if I have 2 here, watch, it'll actually plug A in. It'll plug the 2 in. And it'll do the same thing as I plug in B and C, okay? It's going to start plugging these values in. And if you don't want to see them, again, use this clear symbolics, but clear underscore symbolics, A comma B, and I turned on caps locks, A comma B comma C. And now you have them here. I could, but because I have the numbers, right, I could do a variable and then say the roots are equal to, but I can still see the symbolic. So you can do both. All right. So we've covered quite a bit. For those of you that maybe weren't as familiar with this kind of stuff as other folks, I hope I didn't go too fast. At this time, I think it'd be good if we opened it up to some questions. I'm sure there's a handful regarding symbolics and or solve blocks.
That sounds great, Tim. I appreciate that. And you know, it's nice to see. I like that using the clear symbolics really lets you kind of the best of both worlds there. Any questions out there, guys? Just go ahead and pull them in the chat box, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. We got one that came in here. It says it appears Mathcad cannot get the Laplace transform of derivatives.
If it's a function in the T domain, you should be able to take a Laplace transform of it to get it to the S domain.
So another one came in here. It looks like you can solve blocks, solve partial differential equations.
PDEs are not something that Mathcad Prime can solve symbolically. We can solve them numerically. We don't have a PDE function. We have a function called, well, there's a handful of them, but the one I tend to use is called numol. And it's a differential equation solver, PDE solver.
All right. So using Mathcad, can we, what graphic tools can it modify?
I mean, I think they're probably talking about plotting. Plotting types in Prime are XY polar contour in 3D. And then within certain plot types, you know, you can do different trace styles. I'm not quite sure what they mean by graphic tool other than a plot, though.
Well, it's if you meant something else, like Smart Sketch.
Like embedding a 3x diagram image in. So right now with Mathcad Prime 3.1, you're limited to bringing in images, you know, just either copy and paste them or just insert an image that you have saved on your file or on your hard drive. And I can say that will be with the Prime 4 coming up. We're going to be allowed to embed, Mathcad's going to be an OLE container, so you can embed OLE objects into Mathcad. That will allow you to keep the link between any third-party OLE object you have and have it maintain and update the link when it's out of date.
All right. So, so only limited right now, but we've got more coming down the pipeline with 4.0 being released. All right. We'll just give it another minute, see if anything else comes up. All right, great. Well, that looks like about all the questions we've got so far. But guys, please feel free to send any more in. Any questions? So any questions, or if anyone out there is still using 15 but would like to take a look at 3.1 or start to get access to it, please reach out to one of your MRC sales reps. And great. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thanks, Matt, for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, guys. Have a great day.